Have you ever noticed how the people who forgive the most are often the ones who've been hurt the deepest? There's something strange about this. You would expect that being betrayed or disappointed would make someone harder, more guarded, less trusting. But instead, some people become softer, more patient, more understanding than they should ever be required to be. Why is that? Why do some people keep giving second chances to those who barely earned the first one? That's what we're going to explore. The psychology of someone who forgives too much, and why it's not what it seems. You already know what this looks like. You care, you try, you explain, you understand. And when someone hurts you, you make excuses for them that they never made for you. You say things like, "It wasn't their intention. They were stressed. They're going through something. I don't want to overreact." But here's the thing. Most people who forgive too much aren't doing it because they're weak. They're doing it because they're strong in the wrong direction. You're good at absorbing damage, good at rationalizing pain, good at holding yourself together, even when someone else is falling apart. But this is where it gets complex. People who forgive too much often learn to do it a long time ago. Not as a choice, but as a survival strategy. Maybe you grew up in a home where conflict was dangerous, where staying quiet kept the peace, where forgiveness wasn't kindness, it was self-protection. In psychology, this shows up in attachment patterns. People with anxious or avoidant attachments often use forgiveness as currency, a way to maintain closeness, a way to prevent abandonment, a way to make relationships feel safer, even when they're not. Here's the truth. When you forgive too quickly, you're not healing the relationship, you're preventing it from breaking, and sometimes it's the breaking that would have finally set you free. The psychology behind this runs deeper than simple kindness. 1. Emotional conditioning. If you were rewarded for being easy, understanding, or low maintenance, your brain may have learned something dangerous. If I don't make things worse, maybe they won't leave. Your nervous system remembers this. Your body learned to flinch inward instead of outward. 2. Empathy. Overdrive. Research on mirror neurons shows that highly empathetic people literally feel other people's emotions inside their own bodies. So when someone hurts you, you feel their guilt more than your own pain. You forgive not to protect them, but to turn off the emotional noise inside you. 3. Internalized responsibility. You take responsibility for what wasn't yours. You apologize first. You repair relationships you didn't break. It might feel noble, but it's self-erasing. 4. Fear of loss. Forgiving becomes a way to keep people close, not because you're clingy, but because you know exactly what it feels like to be left behind. And maybe, deep down, you fear that if you stop forgiving, you'll have no one left. Picture this. Someone raises their voice at you. You immediately think, they must be stressed. I'm sure they didn't mean it. Or they disappear for days. You say, they're probably overwhelmed. I'll give them space. Or they forget something important to you. You respond, it's fine. I know they're busy. Here's what's fascinating. You soothe the person who hurt you, while ignoring the version of you who needed soothing. You protect their emotions, while abandoning your own. You rationalize their behavior, while scrutinizing your own. And maybe, you don't even notice you're doing it. Here's the paradox. You forgive too much not because you don't understand your worth, but because you understand their pain. You understand why they act the way they do. You see their childhood wounds. You see their intentions. You see the brokenness behind their behavior. And because you see it, you forgive it. But this is where the danger lies. Seeing someone else's wounds does not require you to let them reopen yours. And maybe that's the real conflict inside you. You think compassion and self-respect can't coexist, but they can. They must. The long-term consequences of over-forgiving often creep in quietly. You start shrinking your needs. You stop asking for explanations. You filter your emotions. You correct your tone. You overthink every text. You walk on invisible eggshells, not because anyone told you to, but because you trained yourself to minimize the risk of conflict. Psychologists call this fawning, a trauma response where you appease others to feel safe. But the truth is, every time you forgive without healing, a small part of you disconnects, not from them, but from yourself. You stop trusting your feelings. You stop believing your pain is valid. You stop recognizing when enough is enough. And eventually, you don't know where your boundaries are anymore. But let me say this clearly. There is nothing wrong with you for forgiving too much. You learned to survive this way. You learned to love this way. You learned to exist in a world that felt unpredictable. Your brain was protecting you. Your heart was protecting you. Your younger self was doing the best they could with what they had. This isn't a flaw. It's a scar. And scars mean you healed once before. You can heal again. Forgiveness isn't your weakness. It's your superpower. You just never learned how to aim it in both directions. And this is where things begin to change. The goal isn't to forgive less. It's to forgive wisely, to pause, to breathe, to ask yourself, is this forgiveness or fear? Am I protecting the relationship or sacrificing myself? You're allowed to take your time. You're allowed to feel hurt. You're allowed to need repair. You're allowed to step back. You're allowed to expect growth, not repetition. Here's what's really happening. When you stop forgiving automatically, you start living intentionally. When you stop absorbing everyone else's pain, you make room for your own healing. And when you finally learn to forgive yourself, your boundaries become clearer, your relationships become healthier, your heart becomes safer. You don't become cold, you become complete. So let's go back to the beginning. Why do some people forgive too much? Because they were taught to survive by smoothing the water instead of making waves. Because their empathy is a language they've spoken since childhood. Because their heart is wired to understand pain instead of punish it. But listen closely. You can understand someone's pain without letting it become your prison. You can be gentle without being silent. You can be kind without being used. You can forgive without disappearing. And maybe the real healing begins when you finally realize your forgiveness is a gift, not a debt you owe. Your heart is allowed to rest. Your needs are allowed to matter. Your boundaries are allowed to stand. And you are allowed to stop choosing peace at the cost of yourself. Remember this, your compassion is powerful, but so is your voice. And when you learn to honor both, you stop forgiving too much and start living in a way that doesn't require you to.